We're doing this in all of the 5th grade classrooms in the Grand Rapids Public School District, but you guys are the lucky ones that get filmed. So I also want to introduce to you Elizabeth Topliff, who is the representative from Fifth Third Bank, and Fifth Third Bank is our generous sponsor who underwrote all the materials for this day. So let's thank our sponsor, and we'll let our instructors get started.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Bruce Cortade. I'm with the law firm of Rhodes McKee, and I'll let my partner introduce himself.
Sure, I'm David Bevins, and I'm also with Rhodes McKee. As you guys noted, that we are lawyers. See that thing right over there? What is that? A shark. Is that what lawyers do? Are we like sharks? No. We help people, okay? That's what we do. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the Constitution. And with that, Mr. Cortade will get started.
Well, I wanted to start out, first of all, by thanking your teachers for having us here today. It's fun to be with you, and we wanted to talk about the Constitution because that's one of the most important documents that affect everybody in this room every single day, and you may not realize how. So if we can go ahead and start clicking there. The first thing is you have to think about what was going on back when the Constitution was being written. This was back in 1787, long time ago. But what was going on? Why did they want to come up with this document? You all know about the Revolutionary War, right? Yeah. And the Declaration of Independence. Well, who can tell me when the Revolutionary War took place? Yeah? 1776?
What day was it? What day do we celebrate our Independence Day? You right here. 4th of July. It was July 4th, 1776. That's why we celebrate that day.
Okay, now who can tell me when the Constitution was signed? 1787. 11 years later. So what was going on between 1776 and 1787? The states, the United States were there, the colonies were there, but there was another document that we had. It was called the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation, basically, they were a contract between all the different states. And it talked about how the states would get along with each other and what they would do for each other. And basically, there was a central government, but it was very weak. So there were some real problems with the Articles of Confederation. And one of them was there was no taxing authority. Do you guys know what taxes are? Yeah.
It's like for every dollar that you pay, you have to get like more 6 cents you have to get out.
Right. The government has the ability to collect money, and it collects money so that it can run its programs. Well, under the Articles of Confederation, they didn't have any ability to tax. So the federal government, the central government, was broke. It didn't have any money. And then you had these 13 colonies who were out there, and they were sort of working together, but they really weren't. So in 1787, a bunch of people got together and said, this isn't working, we have to fix it. And that's what caused them to get together and come up with what we now call the Constitution. Now, if you can click it again. Yeah.
Something about the Declaration of Independence. So what Mr. Cortade just said is we had this Declaration of Independence, then we kind of existed for a while, and we're going to talk about the Constitution in a minute, but I think it's important to understand what the Declaration of Independence said, okay, and what were they thinking, okay? We were existing under the English rule, under the monarchy, and the King of England didn't listen to us, and he taxed us, he took our money, and we didn't have any voice in the process at all. It's called taxation without representation. So the people, the colonies, the 13 American colonies said, you know what, this isn't fair. We got to do something about this. And what they said in the Declaration of Independence is very interesting and it's very important. And I want to read you just a little bit of it. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And these are the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what they're saying there is that it doesn't matter what government exists, it doesn't matter where government is. Each one of us has human rights. We have human dignity that is given to us by God. So it's very important. Governments don't give that. Governments can't take it away. We have those rights, and it's the government's job to recognize those rights and not trample on those rights.
Now, who were the people who got together to actually write the Constitution? Yeah.
I forgot.
Okay. Well, yeah, go ahead.
All the people from different places that got together so they could have peace.
That's a really good start, yeah.
People from 13 colonies.
Right, the
Right.
13 colonies. Although, you know, one of the colonies, Rhode Island, decided not even to send anybody to the Constitutional Convention because they weren't convinced it would work. So there were a total of 55 people who got together at the Constitutional Convention. And of the 55 people who were there, only 39 people ended up signing the document. So 39 people changed the course of our country's history when they came up with this document.
That's less than the number of people that are in this room right now.
Yeah. Now, of those, there were some famous people. George Washington was one of the people who signed it, and so was James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin. But there were a lot of other people that nobody's ever heard of. But what were the backgrounds of some of these people? I think you'd find it interesting. The youngest was a guy named Jonathan Dayton. He was only 26 years old. The oldest was Ben Franklin. He was 81 years old. So they went from 26 years old to 81 years old, the people who signed it. There were 5 people who actually signed both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. So 5 people were around back in 1776 when they came up with that first document that says we're all free, we're all created equal, and they signed the Constitution too. Most of them were extremely well educated, at least for back in that day. You know, most of them didn't go to elementary school because they didn't have elementary schools. They didn't go to high school because they didn't have high schools. So a lot of them were self-educated, but they were very well educated. Look at the books in the back of the room here. Do you know that if somebody had read that many books back in 1787, they would have been the best read person in the world? Because back then, the average person, a very, very well-educated person, had a library of maybe 20 to 30 books. So think about how much information you have at your fingertips now, not only with the books, but with the computers that these people didn't have. You had 35 of these people were lawyers or had some type of legal training. 13 were businessmen. 9 were public servants, so like mayors or governors or judges or things like that. 2 were scientists, 3 were physicians, and 1 was a university president. Notice anything about this picture? I know it's not a good quality. What?
Yeah, there's like one man standing up and everybody's just staring at him.
Well, that's George Washington. Yeah. But look at all of them. They're all men. No women. They're all white. No people of color. Why? Because back then, yeah,
The African American and the white people couldn't be together.
right,
Because
right, yeah.
they didn't like us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there were some real problems then. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. They were different and people didn't understand it. And so back then, the white men were the ones who had all the power. And they were the ones who were in the leadership. So, but keep that in mind. These men who sat in that room still came up with a document based on the premise that everybody was created equal and everybody had rights. That's important for you to think about. That's your school. Because the one thing we want to go over today is what does the Constitution mean to you today? as you're sitting here at Shawmut Hills. So, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Make those free.
Yep. Yeah. And actually, David, if you can just sort of fly through the next three, and maybe we'll come back to them later.
Sure. Just right now.
Yep. Okay, here's a question for you. What rights does the Constitution give you? Yeah.
It gives you two, so you don't need to give so much of your money away. You can keep a lot of it instead of giving it all.
Does everybody hear that? He says it allows you to keep your money. You don't have to give it all away. You can keep your own money. Yeah.
Like we have our own freedom.
Mm-hmm. You have your own freedom. Is that given to you by the Constitution? Okay.
Allows black people to live where white people do.
Allows black people to live where white people do. Anybody else? Okay, guess what? That was a trick question. Because here's the answer about what rights the Constitution gives you. The Constitution doesn't give you anything.
Think about the Declaration of Independence. We have rights. The government can't give us those rights. The government can trample them, but it can't take them away because we have them. Because we have human dignity.
So what the Constitution does is the Constitution recognizes that everyone in this room has rights. And what the Constitution does is it's a contract between, remember the Articles of Confederation were a contract between the different states saying how the states were going to get along? The Constitution is a contract between we the people and the government. And it basically says we have rights that the government cannot interfere with. And we're going to set up a government that can function, but the people have the rights, and the government cannot take those rights away. So that's a very important thing. The Constitution doesn't give you any rights. You have the rights that the Constitution recognizes. Okay. Some of those rights that are recognized, and this is an important one, the freedom of religion. Because historically, back in England, remember that's where most of the colonists were coming from, there was a government-run church called the Anglican Church. And when the leaders got here in the United States, they wanted everybody to be free to practice whatever religion they want. So they set up the First Amendment of the Constitution. Says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the First Amendment, in my mind, it is the most important amendment, because it says we have the right to worship how we want, we have the right to say what we want, we have the right to get a group of people together if we want, even a group of people that says, I hate the United States government. They can still get together and meet and talk about that. And that was a completely radical idea. I mean, you couldn't do that. If you had a bunch of people who got together in England and said, I hate King George, and I want to get somebody new in there, they would have been thrown in jail. But in the United States, you have the freedom of speech where you can get together and say that.
We had a question right here. Did you have a question? I hope so.
Yeah, we'll see. You better get an agent. You can sign a contract with the agent.
Yeah. The Constitution allows that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't the scarf for like the Jews?
Yep. Yep.
So something else that's interesting about the Constitution, the way it's set up. If you notice, what is that called? It's the First Amendment. So that's something. What does an amendment mean? What does it mean to amend something? Yes. To add more, to change it. Okay. So we had this Constitution, and the Constitution set out the basic parameters of our government, separation of powers, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And 3 branches of government, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There were some people who thought that's good enough. We don't need to do anything more. We've set out the government. We set out that it's limited powers. But some other people said, you know what? We want to put out 10 more things, in 10 amendments to this Constitution to make it even more clear what the restrictions on the government are with respect to our rights. And so that's what that first, does anybody know what the first 10 amendments are called? They're called the Bill of Rights. Okay? And that's because the people that were putting the Constitution together, some of them thought we need to be even more explicit, more clear about what the limitations on the government are. And so that's why they put in, among others, the First Amendment. It says the government, you can't get in our way of our free speech and our religion. You can't do that. That's not what we're going to have this government be allowed to do. So it's very important to understand that there's a Constitution and then these Bill of Rights that are even more explicit and more defining of what the limitations of the government are.
Okay. There's another amendment that we want to go over really quickly, and that's called the Fifth Amendment. And this was important because before the Constitution came around, you could have a trial, and I could, if I were the prosecuting attorney, I could accuse Mr. Bevins of stealing something.
It's not true.
But I could make him get on the stand and make him testify and make him say yes or no that he did it. Well, under our Constitution, you have the right not to speak up in a criminal trial against you. The state or the federal government has the burden. They have to show that you're guilty without calling you as a witness. They have to come up with other evidence that shows it. And that was, again, a real departure from the way things were done before the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Double jeopardy. Does anybody know what double jeopardy means?
Anybody, is it like watching the TV show twice?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like another one. Times two.
It is
Well,
times two.
yeah.
That's exactly right. It is. It's
Well,
We have to go to court a second time.
right.
That's exactly right.
Well, what happens is, before they came up with this right against double jeopardy, if I took Mr. Bevins to trial and I said he stole something, and he went all the way through trial, and he won,
Yes, I won.
and he's free, right? He just beat the charges. The state could then go back again and try him again and again and again until we got the result we wanted. Well, what the Constitution says is you get one bite at the apple. So if I can't prove that Mr. Bevins is guilty the first time, and he proves that he's not guilty, he's free, and he doesn't have to worry about the government coming back and charging him again for the same crime. Okay? And then due process, that just means you have constitutional rights that have to be followed. And if the government doesn't follow those rights, you have the right to stand up and say, I cannot be held responsible for the crime because you didn't follow the rules. So it imposed a lot more burdens on the government that they never had before. Okay.
Do you guys understand what that means, the due process? So like if you're out in the playground and somebody throws a ball at your head, right? So let's play that through. You can't, you bring everybody into the teacher, right? And you can't say, all right, Jimmy threw that ball at my head. Jimmy, tell him. Jimmy doesn't have to tell him, okay? You got to say, well, no, I got Sarah and Billy, and they saw him throw that at my head, right? So that's the not being forced to testify. Due process is you got to go in front of your teacher, you got to go in front of the principal, you got to have all these people and all these witnesses, and you got to convince all these people that are making the determination that your side is right. And there's ways that we try to make sure that that's fair and that happens.
And one of those ways is, in the United States, if you're charged with a crime, you have to go before the court, and the court will actually read the charges against you so that you'll know exactly what it is that you're being charged with and what the potential penalties are. There are other places, even today, in the world where people can be held for months and months and years without ever being told what it is that they're being accused of. And that's what the right to due process says. No, look, we're going to be upfront with people. We're going to tell them what they're charged with. We're going to tell them what the potential penalties are. And then we're going to go through a trial where their rights are guaranteed. And we may still find them guilty and we may send them away to prison, but it's only going to be after we make sure that they have a fair trial.
Any questions about that?
Okay. This was an important one too. The Sixth Amendment right gives you, if you're charged of a crime, you have the right to have a jury of your peers decide your fate. That meant something really different back in 1787 than it means right now. Because back in 1787, in order to serve on a jury, you had to be a property owner. Who owned the property? Basically, the rich white people. So it was almost impossible back in 1787, if you were a slave or if you were a foreigner, to get a jury of your peers. But over the years, there have been a lot of lawsuits and a lot of court cases, including one that was brought by a teacher in the Grand Rapids School District that charged the Kent County, our local government, of not having a fair balance on its juries that was representative of the minorities. And as a result of all that, there have been a lot of changes to try and make sure that anybody who's accused of a crime has a diverse jury, a jury that's made up of their neighbors, so that they can get a fair trial.
Why do you think that's important? Does anybody think about why that might be important to have a jury of your peers? Yeah.
Because they listen to you and then they think about it and then they all have to agree.
And that's one reason. So they listen to you and they think about it. But so if I am, let's see, I'm a rich white guy in the olden days, and I've never talked to anybody who isn't rich and white. How am I going to understand what those other people, how they act, what they're doing, why they do things? Can I understand that? I can't understand it very well. But if the jury is made up of people like me, and I'm not rich and white, then they're going to understand, well, I understand why he did that. And while it may look suspicious, but if you understand why that person did it, it's really not suspicious at all. I can't think of a real good example right now, but the reason we want to have a jury by our peers is because we understand who we are and what we do. And something that may seem to be illegal isn't illegal because when you understand why it was done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And here's a little bit of history on that. Back in England, when somebody was accused of a crime, they were brought either before the king or before a lord or somebody like that who, again, was a rich landowner. And you know how you have the picture of Lady Liberty holding the scales of justice? Well, those scales were tipped like this because the lord or the king would only pay attention to the rich people who were bringing the charges. Well, what the Sixth Amendment tries to do is make sure that that scale is even so that everybody gets a chance to be heard. So that's very important. That's what the Sixth Amendment does.
All right, let me give you a little, I did think of an example. I'm a nobody, all right? And I get invited to a rich party. And I'm sitting there and I've got a glass in my hand and I trip and I spill wine all over somebody. And they say, you did that on purpose. That is an absolute, that's an assault and battery, right? So I get taken into a courtroom. And if I stand up there and I say, God, I'm not used to being at parties, and I tripped. People that always go to parties, they'll be like, how can you not be used to going to a party? That doesn't make sense. Of course you're guilty. People that aren't used to going to parties will think, no, I get that. He was probably really nervous, and he probably tripped. So that's why it's so important to have a jury of your peers, because they understand where you're coming from.
Now we're going to spend a little bit more time on the next amendment that I want to talk to you about. It's the 13th Amendment. And I have to tell you a little bit of a story about why this is important to me. The 13th Amendment is the one that basically said It really took the promise of the Declaration of Independence and made it real. Because the 13th Amendment said that there can't be slavery anymore. Everybody is free. So back when they did the Declaration of Independence and they said all men are created equal, back when they did that, it was sort of like, well, we mean it, but there's this whole group of people that we don't consider to be equal. And the 13th Amendment said, no, everybody's created equal. And I just got back from a meeting at the State Bar of Michigan down in Dearborn, where we really focused on diversity and the importance of diversity and how great it is in our society and in the legal profession. And so this is very important to me right now more than ever. Yeah.
Did George Washington write all this?
No.
No.
No, there were a whole bunch of different people who contributed. He was one of the people who worked on the document.
The 13th Amendment came quite a time after the original Constitution.
Yeah. 13th Amendment came after Abe Lincoln. So that was 1787 to 1865. So that was a long time coming. Now, you'd think, 1865, 13th Amendment. Okay, everything's good, right? Everybody's equal, right? Because it says it in the Constitution. Must be true. Can you go ahead and hit the next one, Dave?
Yep.
Plessy versus Ferguson? Okay, yeah?
It's like when the black people, they had to go to the back of the bus, and then the white people, they sit in the front, and then the black people, they drink out of the other sinks, and then the white people drink out of the better ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, they had their own restaurants. Yeah.
Even after the law, they thought it was fair because they were white. They thought they were all better and stuff. But well, they didn't share anything, and they could just black people had the worst living conditions, and white just were snobby and took everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
In some stores, colored people couldn't go in.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, white people, they went to schools, and then the black people went to different schools. They were all the black people were together in one school, and then all the white people were in the other school.
Right. And see, that's the United States Supreme Court in 1896 said that was okay. Said that as long, if you could have separate schools, as long as they were both equal. So this is even after the Civil War. This is after the 13th Amendment that says everybody's equal. The United States Supreme Court in 1896 is saying, oh, but we didn't really mean you had to share everything. You can have separate things as long as they're equal. So there was still a struggle going on back in 1896. So that's 100 years after the Constitution, and people were still debating that.
And does it make sense? I mean, if we're equal, if all men are created equal, all people are created equal, and we're equal in our human dignity, does that make sense at all? That doesn't make sense at all.
Okay, let's go to the next one. So we continued the journey. And this is, you were talking about the separate schools, right? Look at the date of this case, 1954.
50 years after Plessy v. Ferguson.
Yep, and they were still, at that point, arguing the schools in Topeka, Kansas had all black schools and all white schools. And at that point, for the first time, the Supreme Court said, wait a minute, this isn't right. In fact, what the opinion said is, we conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. So they can't be equal if they're separate. So that's why, when I look around your classroom today, and I see just a rainbow of colors and people in all different backgrounds, that never would have happened even 60 years ago. You never would have known each other. Can you imagine a world like that? Yeah.
Didn't Martin Luther King change that?
He did help.
He was one of the people, and we're going to talk about somebody else. And we can go on to the next slide. Okay.
Was it about like Rosa Parks, like when she wanted to do like a boycott on a bus, like when she sat in the front and somebody told her to like go to the back with all the blacks, she refused and said no, and then she got arrested for.
Yeah.
Right? Think of how scary that must have been. You guys, well, think of when you were like a first grader and all the fifth graders were sitting at a table. Would you go up and sit with all the fifth graders? You know, because they'd be sitting there looking at you, hey, little first grader, get out of here. Well, that's what was happening to Rosa Parks. But it was a lot more serious than that.
I mean, look at Rosa Parks. That's how she looked a few years after she didn't give up her seat. I mean, this is a tiny woman. She was a seamstress. Do you know what that means? She sewed clothes. That was her job. That's all she did. And one day, when she was coming back from work, she was taking the bus, and she sat down. And they had a rule that there was a line on the bus, and the black people had to sit behind a certain line. Well, you know what? She was sitting behind that line. But there were too many whites who came in, so one of the whites would have had to stand. So the bus driver turned around, and there were actually 2 seats on each side of the aisle. And Rosa Parks was sitting in the seat on the far right. And he told these 4 people, you have to move. Make way for the white people. And the other 3 people got up and moved. And Rosa Parks, this tiny little woman, said no. And that started a boycott against the whole bus system that lasted for months. And no people of color would ride the buses. And as a result, the city was forced to change its policy. So Rosa Parks did that. And if we can hit the next. This is the actual bus. And remember I told you that this was important to me today? The reason it's really important to me today is that this bus is at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn. And last Thursday night, I was able to go to the museum, and I got to sit in the seat where Rosa Parks sat. And they had a tape playing, and the tape, you got to hear Rosa Parks in her own voice say what was going on in her mind. And what she said was she was tired. She had worked all day, and she was tired, and she was also tired of not knowing what her rights as a human being were. And she had had enough, so she said enough is enough, and she would not get up. And like David said, can you imagine how frightened she was? She didn't know what was going to happen to her. She didn't know if she was going to go to jail. She didn't know if she would be beaten up. But she had the courage to stand up and say, like they say in the Declaration of Independence, we are all created equal. We all have rights that are given to us, not by the government, but by God. And I have the right to sit here the same as anybody else. And it's because of people like her that we're finally making progress. And when I look around the room and I see this whole rainbow of colors, that never would have happened if it weren't for people like Rosa Parks.
And Martin Luther King.
And Martin Luther King.
Didn't the dude told her to get up?
Because there were still too many white people didn't have seats.
It was so unjust. I mean, it was so beyond. I mean, I can't imagine. It's like, telling first graders, get out of my seat. I mean, it's that little. It's that little. It's just tiny little thoughts from tiny little people.
I think. Okay, so here's a question for you. What lesson do we learn from Rosa Parks? Yeah.
Sit in front of the bus.
Yeah?
That's one.
Yeah?
Shotgun. Is that way?
Stand up for yourself. Right.
Shotgun.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
That everybody should be treated equally, even though it doesn't matter what color they are.
Did everybody hear that? Everybody should be treated equally. It doesn't matter what color you are. Yeah. Yeah.
Why are black people calling colored people who are not to no offense, but like white people turn red and blue?
Like my sunburn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Just historically, that's what they were called. Historically, they were called, and actually, there are documents that refer to people of Ethiopian descent because they assumed that anybody who was black must be from Ethiopia. They didn't realize that people who were of different colors came from all over the world. So it started out with Ethiopian, and then they became Negro, and then you couldn't, do you know what the NAACP is? The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And they wanted to be called colored people rather than blacks, because that was the other thing, blacks. And now you have people saying we want to be called African Americans, and you have other people saying, call us this, call us that.
At the end of the day, we're just people, right?
Well, and one of my best friends, who just finished a term as the State Bar of Michigan president, is an African American attorney from Detroit. And he says, call me American. Okay. Okay, so here-
Somebody said that Rosa Parks said stand up for yourself, and she did stand up for herself. But there's something more than she stood up for. I mean, she didn't do that just for herself. She did it for herself, but it wasn't just for herself. She did it. She took a stand for a lot more people than just herself. She even took a stand for white people, because it's bad for white people to treat other people like that. When you beat up your little brother or little sister, that's bad for you, man. It's bad for your little brother or sister, but that's bad for you. And so she took a stand that helped everybody. Now you can't forget that.
yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah.
And here's, when I came up with the answers, this is what we learned from Rosa Parks and from people like Rosa Parks. One person can make a difference. One voice can change the world. Any of you have the ability. You could be the next Rosa Parks. You don't even know it right now, but sometime in your life, something's going to happen where somebody's going to do something that you just know is wrong. And you have the ability to stand up and make a difference. And today's theme, with the Constitution, Rosa Parks teaches us that the Constitution is still available. The Constitution is still vitally important to everybody in this room. So, my wife thinks I'm sort of a nerd for doing this. But a while ago, somebody gave me a copy of the Constitution. And I carry it with me, particularly on a day when I know I'm going to be in court. I make sure that I have it with me. Because this document, for a lawyer, this is why we do what we do. This document is what allows us to help people. And there's a quote in here that I want to read to you, and it's very short. The Declaration of Independence was the promise. The Constitution was the fulfillment. So in 1776, when these guys got together in Philadelphia and wrote that all men were created equal, that was the promise that they were making to everybody, but it wasn't true. it was true, but it wasn't real at the time. The Constitution was the fulfillment of that promise, where we came back after the Declaration of Independence and said, look, we know it wasn't real in 1776, but it is now. And that was when they did that in 1787. And today in 2011, it's still real. Yeah.
Didn't Obama didn't he say the next was the park if he's the first black president?
There has been a lot of progress made, and definitely President Obama, his election as an African American male never could have happened even 20 years ago. Never would have happened. So there's a lot of progress been made. There's a lot more to be made. Okay, did you want to go into the...
I'm not sure we have enough
Okay.
time, but
Well,
let's at least talk about it.
Okay. Okay.
So
You want-
we talked a lot about the fact that today the Bill of Rights and what the Constitution protects. One thing we haven't talked about, and we'll talk about for just a couple of minutes, is the form of government that the Constitution set up and why that form of government is important. So, separation of powers. Why do you think that might be important? Where had America, or where had the colonies been? What kind of government had they been under before they had before the Declaration of Independence? Yes.
A king?
A king, a monarchy. So where is there a separation of powers with the monarchy? With the king? No. All the king. The king decides what to do. The king does it. The king doesn't want to do it. Doesn't happen. King does it. Doesn't. That's it, man. It is just the king. So, in the wisdom of the framers of the Constitution, they established how many branches of government do we have? Does anybody know? Yes. 8, not quite. A little less than that. Yes.
Yeah.
3. Does anybody know what one of them is? Yes.
Congress?
The legislation, yes, the Congress. So the Congress is the one, they make the laws. They have the sole power to declare war. And they basically, that's the group of people that get together to make the laws. Now, there's something very interesting about the way our legislature was put together, because at the time, we had some big states, and we still do today. We had some very small states, and we still do today. All the small states said, you know what, each of our states should have 2 people represent us in the legislature. That's fair. And the big states said, that's not fair. I'm a big state. I got a lot more people. I need to have more representation in the government. And so they were fighting about that. What do you think they did? Does anybody know what they did? Yes.
War?
No, we didn't go to war on that one. Yes, sir.
They made a president?
No, not exactly, because the president was already somebody different. What they did is they made 2 houses of Congress. So you have the House of Representatives, and that is big states get more and little states have less, and you have the Senate, where every state has 2 people. So they split even the legislative body as a compromise called the Great Compromise, so that the big states had a little bit more on one side, and then the small states were equally represented in the Senate. So even that, I mean, we showed how to compromise. The next branch of government is the executive
You hit it.
branch.
You got it. The president.
The president, right. So what does the president do? Has all the executive power. What does that mean to have the executive power? Anybody know? Yes.
Like he can make the laws.
Congress makes the laws.
Yeah, but he can he's control of all these countries. He can't like tell them what to do, but he's like
Yes.
states.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The Congress, they like tell him if he makes a choice, they tell him if they like it or if it's not.
So, right, and I think that's close. I mean, Congress then passes a bill, and it doesn't become law until the president signs it, and the president can say, no, I don't want to sign this, send it back. Now, the Congress can then override that decision and still make it become a law, even if the president doesn't sign it, if they have enough people to pass it. So the president enacts the legislation, and in the executive branch enforces the law. Okay, so we have laws, boom, there's where the president says, we're going to make sure all these laws get enforced. Also, the commander-in-chief of our armies, and makes appointment. Okay, right, that's another important. So we have a third branch of our government, which is the judicial branch, the judges, and more specific, the Supreme Court. And the president is empowered to appoint those Supreme Court justices, but Congress has to agree. It's called, they have the right to basically tell the president, nope, you got to pick somebody else. So the judicial is the last branch, and that's the branch in which we do a lot of our work. The important thing is when the legislature makes a decision, and the president signs that law. Okay, Congress creates a law, president signs it, everybody says, wonderful. What if that law said, for whatever reason, the popular people said, the most of the people in the United States said, we want a law that says you can't talk about, we're going to restrict your free speech. And then the president signs it, it's a law, wonderful. Well, we have a constitution that says you can't restrict free speech. And so the judiciary, the judicial branch, has to say, I see what you guys did, but it doesn't fit within our Constitution. You can't do that. Sounds kind of crazy and stupid, but you can think of one great example. We've been talking today where all sorts of laws were passed that violated the Constitution. Anybody have an idea? Rosa Parks? There were all sorts of laws. They were called the Jim Crow laws. There were all sorts of laws that were very discriminatory. These are laws that Congress and other legislative bodies put together, that presidents and mayors and all these other people signed, but they violated the Constitution. So even if popular opinion wants to do something, the judicial branch stands in their way and says, no, we're not going to do that because it violates the Constitution. It's a great fail-safe to the swings of popular opinion.
And for that reason, look at that last bullet point on that slide. Federal judges are appointed for the rest of their lives. Why is that important? Because that means they don't have to worry about being reelected, or they don't have to worry about, well, boy, if I come out with this rule, it might upset the president, and he'll take my job away. So the lifetime appointments is really important, so that the whole system, the three parts of government, it's all set up. They call it checks and balances. If one part of the government has power, there's another part of the government that has the ability to balance out that power. And that's why when you look at the fact that these 39 men who signed the Constitution in 1787, they had the intelligence to think about problems that could come 200 years after they died. And they came up with a system of checks and balances to make sure that no one part of the government could ever get too much power and interfere with the rights that the government doesn't give, but that the government recognizes.
Think about go back to the idea of a king. King can do whatever he or she, king or queen can do whatever he or she wants. In our system, that can't happen. As powerful as the president is not a king. The president has checks and balances. As powerful as the Congress is, checks and balances. Yes, sir.
So the president doesn't make the laws?
He does not make the laws. He enforces them. Congress makes the laws. He signs them. And a lot of times today, particularly, this didn't happen as much hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but today the president will try to set a plan and try to tell the Congress what kind of laws they should be thinking about putting together. But he doesn't make them. He has to rely on Congress to do that.
President Obama made a couple speeches last week talking about his jobs bill that he wants. Well, if the president could make the law, he'd never have to make that speech. He'd just write a jobs bill and it would become law. But instead, what he did last week was he said, I have a plan that's going to create these jobs, and this is how I want to do it. And basically what he was doing was he was saying, so please, Congress, here's my plan. I need you to enact it. So Congress has to actually make that law if it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, President Obama can't just sign a piece of paper and make it law. Okay, you know, we've got a couple minutes left, and we're going to have question and answer, but we have something that we wanted to leave for you guys, but also for people who are going to come after you. So we have a book about the American Revolution that we're going to leave for the library. Actually, I'll leave it with your teachers, and they can decide whether they want it in the classroom or in the library. Everything about the Founding Fathers. So you can read about the people like George Washington and James Madison and everybody that signed this document that we're talking about. And it's really fascinating, some of the things you'll learn about. Like, everybody heard George Washington has wooden teeth, right? It's not true. They did a bone scan, and they found out that he actually they were made out of ebony and gold and lead and donkey teeth. So you can read through this book and find that out. This is a book about the best speeches that American presidents have ever given. And it's also got discs in it so that you can hear the speeches. And I think it's everybody from the actual voices of every president since Benjamin Harrison. You'll hear them give the speeches. So you can read the speeches in here, and then you can actually hear them when you play the disc. And then we have, I was a history major when I was in college. And I think, you know, there's a saying that says that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. So when you go back and you see what people did 200 years ago, it's not just something that happened way back then. You look at what things were going on in their lives then, and you see how they reacted, and that will show you what's happening now in a lot of ways is similar to what was going on then. And you can try and see how people are going to react. So we got books about the Civil War, and they got discs on them too, about all the American presidents, about World War I, and about World War II. So we're going to leave these with you. The lessons that history teaches are just as important to you today as it was to the people when they were alive and these things were going on. So I really encourage you, talk to your teachers, check out these books, listen to the discs, take a look at the pictures. And we have a few minutes for questions and answers. Yeah? I'm sorry? A little bit. Lincoln Lawyer, that was the one with Matthew McConaughey and
Better looking, but other than that.
yeah. Yeah. No, we do we do some of the same things. Both David and I try cases, so we go into courts and we fight for our clients. Yeah.
Have you ever met a celebrity?
I've met a few of them.
Who are they?
I met President Clinton. I met all of the justices on the Michigan Supreme Court. I met Gordie Howe. I met Steve Eiserman. I met Al Kaline. Of course, Al Kaline's too old for you guys. So no, I've met a few.
Yes, sir.
How do you guys get your money? Give that information out.
How do we get our money? That's the question? Yeah, that's a good question. We have people that have a problem, and they come to us and they say, I have a legal problem, I need you to help me with that. And we don't have, like, if somebody was making a chair, you say, go, I need you to make me a chair. At the end of the day, you have a chair. Well, all we have is our time. And so we have to charge them for the time that we spend helping them on their problem. And so if you come into me and say, I have a problem and it takes me 5 hours to deal with your problem, I charge you for the time that it took me to resolve that problem.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What kind of school do you have to go to become a lawyer?
You have to go to college, and you have to get a college degree, and then law school afterwards. And most law schools, it's a 3-year program. So you end up going to 4 years of college and then 3 years of law school.
7 years?
Yeah.
Long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you have to stay in college?
I'm sorry. 7, we have to go through your 12th grade, then you go to college for 4 years, then you go to 3 years of law school. So I was 26 years old when I graduated law school.
There's a question right here about why you have to go to so much school, and I think the reason is because the law is pretty complex. There's a lot of things you got to kind of know, and at least have in the background of your mind, so that when somebody comes to you with their problems, you're going to have enough knowledge base to help them out. And we want to make sure that the people that are lawyers are really helping people out, not just taking their money. So that's why you have to have a lot of school for that.
And that's the thing about being a lawyer that I love, is you get to help people. We get to fix problems. And that's something that I know a lot of people go to law school because they want to be able to help people. Yeah.
When you go to college for 4 years, does it have to be a specific one? So you can go to law school?
The question was whether you have to go to a specific college. And as much as I'd love to tell you that you have to go to U of M, because that's where I went, you can go to any college. You can go to any college and then go to law school.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I met President Clinton. Yeah.
Who's won more cases out of you two?
He's older, so him.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you guys did something bad, would you need a lawyer for you?
Yes.
Yes.
It's like, well, if a doctor got sick, the doctor doesn't really work, can't really do surgery on himself, right? So a lawyer, they say that a lawyer who represents him or herself has a fool for a client. That means it's not a very good idea to do it.
Yeah. I've been a lawyer for 23 years.
I've been a lawyer for 18 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Given enough time, statistically, I am catching up. Anything else? Hey, guys, you were great.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for your
Thank
attention
you.
this morning.